Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final session of A Place in the Sun Live digital event French Masterclass. We've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about mortgages, tax and financial considerations.
How to build your own home.
How to build your own home. Sorry about that. And we've had lots of questions coming in from people as well, which we've tried to answer as many as we can during the session, but lots have been unanswered. So we thought we'd have a final one today where we answer some of those questions and also learn a bit more as well about our panelists. And you can direct questions as well to each panelist if you've got anything specific you want to ask. So Liz, I know Liz is on the panel today. You've got some you're going to just put to the panelists about Brexit, I believe.
Well, yeah, we as you say, Richard, we covered a lot of ground today, but there's a few we kind of got a lot of questions covered off, but there are a few that were outstanding, and mainly to do with some of them to do with what you can do after the end of this year. In terms of, I'm not sure what you covered in the last session, but I mean, one key question was, actually to Joe, this might be good for you, is that, if you're going to rent, because buying this year is going to be a bit of a rush, there's not going to be a problem with, we know you're allowed to buy next year, but I mean, there's no other reason why, you shouldn't buy next year at your leisure, is there, in terms of
no, not at all, because if you imagine, obviously we're not just selling to Europeans, we sell to Americans, South Africans, other nationalities outside of Europe, who can still buy in France. If you're trying to get in before the Brexit deadline, you can rent as well. You don't have to buy. You could rent at the same time before the 31st of December, and then you'll be feasible for all of the regulations that are going to come in after as such.
Yeah, and I think that came out of another couple of sessions. I think I remember asking you, Barbara, that you don't actually have to rent a house. You can actually stay at a friend's house and send a letter to the town hall or something, or get some sort of letter. Tell me if I'm right. And I think you can even stay on a sort of on a static home or something. There are sort of different permutations, aren't there?
Yeah, I think you definitely have to register yourself that you are living in France, so that you've become a fiscal residence in France. You can either do that at the local mayor's or at the prefecture, which is like the town hall, but you do need some proof that you are physically living there. So that would be the best way to go, is to go to the local mayor. If you're staying with a friend, you'd need a letter from the friend signed by them to say that you're actually at that address as such. But you can do that, yeah.
One of the things that did come up in the last session when we were talking about this was apparently having a utilities bill, but specifically an EDF bill, is a very good proof of being resident in some format in France. So get a utilities bill, ideally EDF, in your name. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but we had people suggesting that in the last session.
Yeah, I mean, although saying that, you can have a holiday home with an EDF bill as well. So, you would need to show some sort of proof that you actually are living there permanently as such. But an EDF bill would do, and also a rental agreement or a compromis bond if you've signed a compromis bond and you're just waiting to sign the act as such. Yeah,
I mean, if you've got a holiday home and you're going to move and you're moving to it, you've got a permanent address there anyway, haven't you? I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I ask very quickly, because this is something I didn't manage to cover last session, and this is for Barbara, is just quickly outline the inheritance rules in France, because they're different to the UK with forced heirship, and it is quite a big consideration.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and as lawyers we talk about estate planning. So you're planning for what would happen if you die living in France or owning assets in France. And French has its own inheritance rules, okay? But what a lot of people watching will perhaps know is that there's something called the EU succession regulation, often known by the snazzy title of Brussels 4, which is not going to be affected by Brexit. So the EU succession regulation will continue to apply and be relevant for when you're looking at your inheritance planning, okay? And in simple terms, what that does, it allows you, if you're a resident in France, it allows you to escape the French rules so that you can then say, well, I want English law to govern what happens when I die living in France, okay? But it's not a panacea. It's not necessarily the best option for everybody. And most importantly, it doesn't alter the tax position. So French inheritance tax rules continue to apply even if you use this EU succession regulation to elect the law of your nationality, so for example English law, to say who gets what. It's not going to change the actual inheritance tax position, and it's that tends to worry people most, okay? Anything that passes between a married couple on death is tax-free, okay? And then children, natural children, have an allowance of 100,000 euros each before they pay any inheritance tax in France on anything they're inheriting, okay? But stepchildren will be taxed at 60%, okay, of the value of whatever they're inheriting. So this is where involving, you know, lawyers such as us who can explain the workings of inheritance rules in France and what the options are to make sure who you want to inherit does inherit, but at the same time looking at the tax aspect, you know, it's really important, okay? And especially if you're going through the process of buying now, this is something that should be looked at as part of the buying process, okay? I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I was going to say, I saw a question coming in, Richard, about the rental agreement we just alluded to. I mean, basically, if you want to rent a property, you don't have to have a history of working in France or a French contract of employment, do you? You can just rent property, Joe.
Well, it depends who you're renting it from. If you're going through an agency, they may ask for proof of income, of course, so you may have to prove that you can afford to pay it, or you've got sufficient funds in the bank to be able to do that. But yeah, it depends. I mean, if you're renting from a friend or you're renting a gîte or something like that, they can draw up an agreement with a notaire, as you know, a brief, short agreement. Really depends who you're renting from.
You just answered, in fact, another question. This is a real hot potato. This from Pippa Matham, who says they want to rent a gîte for 6 months while they look for a property to buy. Will that be all right? Well, the answer is it will be if you have a formal contract drawn up. Is that rather than a holiday?
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing it purely for the reason that you need to be in before the 31st of December, then you need to be able to show that rental agreement. I mean, you can get a rental agreement from a post office, you know, and get two parties to sign that. So it's quite straightforward and quite easy to do.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt. The gîte owner needs to be prepared to put a utility bill, or at least one utility bill, in your name, and that's where the difficulty with the gîte rental is. So, you know, the advice we're giving really is to look at a 12-month furnished rental or a three-year unfurnished rental. But once you've signed these rental contracts, you know, you can give notice. You don't have to stay for the whole term. But those are the sort of rental contracts that are going to give you the stable residence that the rules are saying you need to be able to prove. So really you need to steer away from renting a gîte, you know, for anything less than 6 months. It's probably not going to meet the requirements.
Yeah. Thanks, Barbara. Gary, a couple of questions for you. Yeah, the first one from Steph. Steph's is, I want my husband's name on the deeds with mine for the property, but the mortgage will only be in my name. Is that usual?
No, as far as I'm aware, I don't think that will be possible. Here normally in France is that all purchasers of a property would also need to go on the mortgage deeds, and vice versa, all those people that will go on the mortgage application. and had the mortgage offer in their name, equally would have to be co-buyer. It can be slightly different, however, if they were kind of here in France, French tax residents, and then we might have that instances where people are sort of becoming personal guarantors to the mortgage as well. That's quite uncommon when all of the borrowers and the guarantors will be overseas residents. And if that's the case in this case here, then from my experience, it would be all buyers are on the mortgage, all people on the mortgage, also co-buyers.
Great, thanks. And while you're on, another question: is there an upper age limit for borrowers in France? And this is linked to something we covered in the first session when we said that someone could use their pension to service a mortgage. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very common here. The French banks sort of don't do what is quite often, the case in the UK or the United States or elsewhere around the world, where they give open-ended mortgage end dates. Here in France, it is true that it's linked to the lenders, but it's very common that traditional French banks will want the mortgage to expire at the client's 70th birthday. Some will go up to the 75th birthday. And for overseas clients, I only know of one that will take a client up to 80, which is still a long time, but thereon, it tends to be no, that mortgage has got to have finished by the client or the eldest borrower's 80th birthday.
Okay, thanks.
And at the other end of the spectrum, we've got a question about children being included on the purchase. I know from doing a session in Spain, I think if you're over 18, you can be on their sort of deeds. What about in France?
Yeah, from a mortgage application, yeah, you're quite correct. Yeah, 18 would be the minimum age, though in all honesty, that's incredibly rare that we'd get a child of 18 on the mortgage deed itself. However, I don't know whether it's been covered in the other sessions. I dare say French real estate holding companies might have been looked at, SCIs or SRLs de famille. It's true that within those companies, of course, children may well be shareholders along with their mum and dad or their parents or whoever. And there, of course, they are kind of connected to the mortgage and also ownership of that property. That may well be a good way around it.
Yeah, from an inheritance point of view as well.
Sure, yeah.
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 Okay. I've got a question from someone who's been quite prolific in answering lots of questions today. Yogesh Mehta, do you need a French bank account in order to rent? If yes, what is required to be able to get a French bank account?
Who's that directed to?
Joe. Or unless Tom wants to talk about bank accounts, I don't want to throw him a curveball.
Yeah, if you've got an address, it's quite easy. We obviously open accounts for lots of clients all the time. You just need a proof of address of where you're living in France. If, for example, a client's buying in France, but they still live in the UK, the compromis de vente would suffice as proof of address of the address that they're going to be buying. Anything that if you're renting in France, you will definitely need a French bank account for all the direct debits for EDF, electricity and stuff like that anyway. Okay. But they're not difficult to open, generally speaking.
Okay, brilliant.
Can I throw one at Barbara about capital gains tax? Let's have a go anyway. So the question is from Jan Kumar regarding capital gains tax on your UK property. Would it be charged on the increase that occurs from the moment that you become a French resident? I'm guessing that it will become a second home then once you move to France. So yeah, what is the situation with that?
Well, I'm not a UK tax expert. My understanding is that for the purposes of UK tax and HMRC, if it's been your main residence, okay, then you benefit from the main residence exemption. And so if you sell it after you've moved to France, you're given a little bit of leeway. And it used to be sort of up to 2 years. But I think it's come down a little bit now. It's probably less than 1 year now. So it's not really something to sort of risk, because you could lose the main residence exemption and so on. So that's about as much as I can say on that.
Okay.
That's quite an important thing, really, isn't it? The timing then of when you sell your UK home. Yeah, not to leave it too late. Yeah.
Right. All right. From capital gains tax to cob houses. Tom, this is a question the only question we didn't get to in our session earlier, a planning question. How easy is it to get planning permission for an alternative build like a cob house or straw bale house?
Relatively simple, because I guess the means of which you construct your house is entirely really up to you, as long as you're within the regulations of construction. There are some regulations around fire safety which are obviously you have to abide by, and in certain areas of France there are kind of tougher restrictions associated with wildfire and the extinguishing and protection of building against wildfire. But other than that, you know, there aren't, as long as it sits within the French kind of building regulations, there's no issue. It's planning wise, stylistically, that's where you're gonna come unstuck if you're suggesting something which is kind of out there in a beautiful village or something, but otherwise constructionally not necessarily a problem.
Thank you. Okay. Right.
I was going to ask Tom, well, Tom and Gary, someone who wants to self-build in France, is it easy to get finance or a loan to help you do that? Is that something you can?
We had this question earlier, and I dodged it.
So it's over to me, yeah. No, it is true. It can be done. Absolutely, finance can be obtained from the French banks in order for self-build projects. However, you know, when we talk about self-build, as has been highlighted, the regulations can be extremely strict here. Traditionally, what happens is that the French banks will probably insist on one thing first of all, and that there is an oversight of the project itself. So what we would call a project manager. Typically, that would be, you know, a qualified architect maintaining, you know, delivering the build contract. And with that, the bank would then check off the actual contract in terms who are the individual building companies. They professionally qualified. They would do background credit checks on these individual companies to make sure they're not going to default or go bankrupt at any moment in the future. And that's really what we need to get through. And then, of course, making sure that the design, the materials involved, the costs, etc., all fit within the individual bank's criteria. But yes, you know, it can be done. Absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
Brilliant. We've got a question about EHIC cover. Will EHIC cover end at the end of the year if we have applied for French residency? But I mean, I think it will end at the end of the year, won't it? Unless there's a deal to some kind of extend some kind of bilateral some facility for Brits and healthcare in Spain. France. Sorry, I'm flipping between countries. What's your understanding of that, Joe, in terms of health cover?
Well, we really don't know. That's the thing. Until we know what the deal is with Brexit, we really can't say. We presume it will be reciprocal as it is at the moment. I mean, there's more French living in the UK than there is Brits living in France. And there's lots of things that the Brits and French do that are outside of the EU anyway, like the double tax treaty and things like that. So we imagine that everything will be fine. And something will be reciprocal between French and the UK. But at the moment, it's, you know, how long is a piece of string? We don't know what the deal is or what is going to happen. If you're living in France permanently and you're working in France, then obviously you can get into the healthcare system. You can apply for a carte vitale, which is like your healthcare card. And that's quite simple if you're working. But if you're not working, we really don't know. We'll probably have to wait and see what the Brexit deal is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Can I just throw a question at those of you living in France at the moment? Do you, in Britain, we're seeing sort of COVID getting people resetting their life choices and doing things differently. In France, do you see that happening? I mean, I know people are moving out for more space to the country, etc. But I read in the FT this morning that the French are going back into their offices more than the Brits. Do you see, I mean, what's it like? Do you see fundamental changes to anything?
We've seen a massive increase in people moving to the countryside. I mean, the Parisians, for example, were up 42% on sales to Parisians who want to move out of the city. And as we said in the earlier session, you know, looking for homes with office space or working from home. There's been a lot of companies that are taking back some staff and leaving the others working from home, so they can have, particularly in cities, so they can have smaller office space, which is cheaper on rental. And the fact that people have actually managed to work from home as well is changing. It is changing the marketplace as such.
Yeah, I'd also add, I think historically the French aren't particularly trusting of consultants who work from home, and so I think that's over the course of the first part of this year that's changed. I mean, there's far more now consultants and people working from home, so it's become the norm. So that kind of method of working has definitely become more normal in France, and I think people are starting to move out to the as Joe said, slightly less rural, or more rural areas, and out of the big cities.
Brilliantly, and it's shoved sort of French notaires into the 21st century, hasn't it? With them getting to be able to sign things without being in person. I think that's something we talked about, Joe, earlier on in the summer, about.
Yeah, I think it's totally changed the way estate agency has worked, because you have been able to sign by DocuSign, etc., which was never heard of before. And, you know, the notaires in the past would never have done signings without the people being in front of them. So it has sort of changed the face of how things will go. And we don't know what's going to happen with COVID in the future. So I think we'll see more of that. Even compromis de vente can now be signed by DocuSign, etc. So yeah, it will change, because we don't know how long, obviously, COVID's going to go on for as such.
Okay.
I would just add to that. I mean, it's still a little bit patchy. You know, some of the bigger notarial practices are more technically advanced than some of the small rural ones. So it is a little bit patchy, but definitely there's a lot more flexibility for remote signatures. Although Gary may agree with this, that the banks are probably still a little bit nervous of loan deeds being signed remotely, and may well want to see that the people are there in front of the notaire when they're signing the loan deed. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I would agree with that. That is true. That there are some banks that are now electronically sending mortgage offers back out to the clients, and they are being signed electronically and sent back. But that's a rare. But I do know of one or two banks that have done that. On the whole, it's still old-fashioned paper-based being couriered out to the clients. In terms of opening up a bank account, however, this was even pre-COVID, so changed. But yes, if the borrower is a resident, let's say within the European Union, then with most banks in France, it's pretty much possible to open up the bank account without physically walking into the local branch. However, it was before, and it still is. Typically, if they live anywhere else around the world, bizarrely, the bank wants to see the client first before they allow the bank account to be opened, which is kind of a double-edged sword, because when we've got clients in Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, Argentina, it's not always easy for them to just come to France to open up the bank account, fly back home, and come back again later if they're not using a power of attorney to actually use to complete at the notaire's office on the day that the formal closure takes place. But you know, it's getting easier and a bit more flexible. But yeah, in terms of the mortgage offers, etc., things are still being done the old-fashioned way on the whole.
Can I ask Barbara a quick question? It's come in from an anonymous person. I think the answer is, you answered it before with the Brussels Convention and deciding your will yourself, but they've asked, does property have to be divided equally between children in France? My older child is disabled, and inheriting would be actively unhelpful to him. So I suspect that's because of, you know, state benefits that the disabled child is receiving, which can be affected if they inherit you know, a chunk of assets. So you know, if they're British nationals, then yes, they've got this option under
the EU succession regulation, Brussels 4, to exclude one child from their estate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, well, there's lots of, I was just going to flag up that there's lots of useful information on placeinthesun.com for listeners, including the frequently asked questions on French residency, Brexit, etc., that we did from the last raft of webinars back in June, July. So do look there for any resources, and of course you can listen to all the sessions today if you've missed any of them on by listening to the recordings on the website, and you can book sessions with any of the panelists here on Zoom. And we're going to have more sessions in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be doing one on French, different areas at least, and maybe some new. I'm not quite sure of the whole schedule yet. Richard, any final thoughts?
I think probably really just to ask the panelists, given everything that's going on, and if people are nervous about buying France, and you know people are with COVID and Brexit, it's really just to be patient and ride out this time and not let Brexit deter you moving to France, because we were talking about it in the previous session. It doesn't make any difference whether you're EU or non-EU, you're going to be able to live in France. Just might be slightly different paperwork involved. And with regard to COVID and travel, it's just, there's things you can be doing now from the UK. We've talked about, doing things remotely now. So really it's just a question of being patient. I mean, would you agree with that? How do you reassure your clients at the moment who might be a bit nervous?
I would, sorry.
No, go for it, Barbara. You jump in.
I would say that if you possibly can move before the end of the transition period as a British national, then you should do it, because there are still a few unknowns. One of which is for the uprating of pensions, UK pensions. It's not clear whether if a British national moves after the 1st of January next year, and then it becomes entitled to their UK state pension, whether that will be fixed at a level, and it won't then increase incrementally over the years as it does for UK residents. So that's one of the things that could change. And also stricter requirements on proving your income, and that you're not going to be a burden on the French state. So my advice is, if you can move before the end of the year, then do it. But obviously, if it's a case of getting a rental, then do that. But make sure it's a rental that qualifies. Yeah.
I was just going to jump in and say, I can give no advice on the technicalities per se, but we deal with a huge number of kind of American, Australian, South African clients who operate and work in France, Brits at the moment, and so therefore I can't see there being a major problem. And as you say, if there's likely to be more paperwork. But if you're intent on moving over or buying a second home over here, then the paperwork, there's a number of professionals who work in the country who can deal with that paperwork for you. So there's always people to help you get through that bureaucracy hurdle. And so I wouldn't necessarily use use the end of the year as a stumbling block. Let's say if you've got a dream to come over, then there may well be other things you have to do, but there are people to help you do them.
Right.
Very good advice, I think. Yeah, the one thing that often buyers say is, they wouldn't regret. There's small things they might do differently, but they always say, oh, I wish I'd done it sort of a year or two before, because it's always it's generally a great decision. So
I think as well, France is a lifestyle choice. Most Brits that move to France is for the lifestyle, and the lifestyle's never going to change. It's always going to be like this, whether it's COVID, Brexit, or whatever. So, and before Europe, people have always, you know, Brits have always been had a love of France and moved to France, and it is the lifestyle, and it is a fantastic life to live. So, you know, as we say, the sooner the better, really, and nothing else is really going to affect France and your decision to move here.
Yeah, very true.
Someone listening has just corrected me on the pension point, so I'm very happy to be corrected. It's not my area of expertise, but if the uprating of pensions is now clear and it's not going to be a problem post the end of the transition period, I'm very pleased to hear that. So thank you to whoever's contributed and put me right on that.
Great. Brilliant. Well, I hope we've all learned lots from today. I think so. I know I have. So I think it's time to close off. Any final tips? Final word?
I think we've covered the...
Brilliant. Well, keep an eye on the schedule for the next couple of weeks. Book some sessions. Make the most of the facility to organise some one-to-one chats, and good luck with your property search if you're out there, and thank you for listening to our French masterclass. Okay, thanks to all the panel still here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Au revoir.
Thanks.
Good luck,
Au
everyone.
revoir.